my regular viewers will be aware I've been somewhat preoccupied with, I suppose, three themes on this channel: Islam and cosmology, personality, religion and creation, quantum theory and the seeming resonance with magic. I'm therefore indebted to Dr. Angela Puccia for introducing us to a new academic tradition which somewhat unites these themes. Now, I've mentioned Dr. Angela Puccia previously, and indeed recommended her channel, Angela's Symposium. But her vlog, Astrology Reborn, the new science that unites planetary forces with the human mind, has completely blown me away. You may also be aware that I instinctively believe that some profound knowledge may be found within the Frankfurt School. But this new line of inquiry seems to bridge this gap, a gap that I've been looking for. Now, I was so impressed with this vlog from Angela that I sent it to two of my subscribers, Ali Mingan and Lukman. Ali could not understand why I was so excited, accusing it of being pseudoscience, even being completely dismissive of quantum physics and psychology. That's two of my major preoccupations. As a result, I broke off contact with Ali, and I must apologise to him. You may also recall that in my vlog, Have I Got It All Wrong?, I describe how some people whom are dominated by their left brain, and I simply cannot comprehend them. But perhaps more importantly, nor they I. And I have to conclude that Ali is one of these. Ali, for some reason, had asked for my contact details, and I don't like giving them out, and I ended up and I relented. He seemed to suggest he had important information for me, but it was never forthcoming. But if you want to contact me outside my channel, I'm going to have to be much more guarded in the future. You see, I'm a private person. I don't even watch television, as I focus on meditation and my thoughts. Yes, I am an empath and somewhat introverted, shunning small talk. An empath that's learning to put up boundaries, but my first line of defence has to be physical. The French psychologist and astrologer Michel Gauquelin, in his book L'Influence des Astres, The Influence of the Stars, 1955, suggested that 5 planets correlated with eminence in fields broadly compatible with the traditional planetary rulership. However, largely because performance in sport is more quantifiable, later research has tended to single out the Mars effect. He suggested that a statistically significant number of sports champions were born just after the planet Mars rises or cumulates. He also divided the plane of the ecliptic into 12 sectors, identifying 2 key sectors of statistical significance. Needless to say, this was somewhat controversial, and his claims have been somewhat disproved by statistical analysis, often using the Zeitlin test. Nevertheless, there does appear to be a correlation which is beyond pure chance. Whilst, yes, the evidence is somewhat contradictory, it is somewhat counterintuitive to materialist scientists, suggesting that the planets do indeed influence our lives on Earth. Of course, this is the basis of astrology, and a belief held by many that are not constrained by the rigid logic of materialistic science. Pascual Jordan, 18th of October 1902 to 31st of July 1980, was a German theoretical and mathematical physicist. He made significant contributions to quantum mechanics and quantum field theory. He contributed much to the mathematical form of matrix mechanics and developed canonical anticommutation relations for fermions. He introduced Jordan's algebra in an effort to formalise quantum theory, and the algebra have since found numerous applications within mathematics. Jordan connected the decoherence with thermodynamic increase in entropy, connected with the increase of information in the measurement that was recognised by the conscious observer. He noted that every micro-physical observation led to some form of macrophysical record containing information. Indeed, if it did not, there would be nothing to be observed by the conscious observer. In the 1950s, he proposed links between cosmological theory and the geological and paleontological sciences. These were derived from Paul Dirac's hypothesis of 1937 that the gravitational constant G decreases with cosmic time. Pascual Jordan developed its geographical consequences, concluding that the Earth is expanded. He also had a strong interest in biology, psychology and parapsychology. In Veredangun und Komplementariatat, he likened Freud's concept of repression with Niels Bohr's concept of complementarity. In fact, Niels Bohr himself also had more than a passing interest in merging psychology with physics. Jordan also used the metaphor of the split personality to explain electrons behaving both as waves and particles. Later he corresponded with Jung on parapsychology, and this was to bring him into contact with Wolfgang Pauli, who shared Jordan's interest in parapsychology, but was much more reluctant to commit his vague theorems to publication. In fact, he was reluctant to publish altogether. Jordan had been somewhat ignored by the academic community due to his membership and indeed active support of the Nazi Party, later becoming a Christian democratic politician within West Germany. A more unifying theory comes from Wolfgang Pauli, 25th of April 1900 to 15th of December 1958, who first postulated the neutrino. Pauli was an Austrian theoretical physicist and one of the pioneers of quantum physics. In 1945, Pauli received the Nobel Prize in Physics for his decisive contribution through his discovery of the new law of nature, the exclusion principle, or also known as the Pauli principle. He demonstrated, amongst other consequences, why electrons in an atom don't all cluster together in the lowest energy quantum state and render it unstable. The discovery involves spin theory, which is the basis of the theory of the structure of matter. Pauli spent a year at the University of Göttingen, where he assisted Max Born, and the next year the Institute of Physics in Copenhagen, later the Niels Bohr Institute. From 1923 to 1928 he was professor at the University of Hamburg, where Pauli was instrumental in the development of the modern theory of quantum mechanics. In particular, he formulated the exclusion principle and the theory of non-relativistic spin. In 1928, Pauli was appointed Professor of Physics at ETH Zurich in Switzerland. He held visiting professorships at the University of Michigan in 1931 and the Institute of Advanced Study in Princeton in 1935. What I find so interesting about Pauli is his ability to merge physics, metaphysics and psychology. and indeed parapsychology, and whilst insisting on the rigorous application of the scientific method, or at least a scientific method, seeing physics and psychology as a mirror symmetry, and much in the same way that Ibn Arabi merges Neoplatonism with Islam by insisting on locating his theories within Al-Quran. I admire both so much for their commitment to working within such constraints, something I myself never have any time for. Maybe this says a lot about our personality and individual psychology. You see, when I'm confronted by irremovable objects, I simply go round them, rather than the perceiver in attempting to move them. And perhaps this is the basis of my mystical beliefs. And nevertheless, his legacy is somewhat overshadowed by his controversial private life. Having a failed marriage with Kata Margarita Deppner, a Berlin cabaret dancer, indeed he's said to have led something of a double life and is known to have had a love for the nightclubs of Hamburg. Heisenberg wrote of him, "Wolfgang is a typical nightbird. He preferred the town, liked to spend evenings in the same cafe, and would thereafter work on his physics with great intensity and great success." Following a personal crisis in January 1932, Pauli consulted psychiatrist and psychotherapist Carl Jung. Jung interpreted Pauli's deeply archetypical dreams based on the I Ching. Jung's elaborate analysis of more than 400 of Pauli's dreams is documented in Psychology and Alchemy. Jung's archetypes have been associated with astrological signs, a development which Jung himself approved of. Rather amazingly, it was through examining one of Jung's prints of William Blake's Jacob's Dream, which led to Pauli's transformation. This shows the 7-stage ascent of the soul through the planetary spheres. As you know, I'm a massive admirer of William Blake, and I have to equally admire both Jung and Pauli for this. Pauli became a collaborator of Jung's. Now this may seem extremely odd, but Jung had actually met with and been influenced by a young Albert Einstein. Pauli believed that the probabilistic nature of quantum theory and the uncertainty principle offered the possibility of discovering something beyond the mind-matter gap. He soon began to critique the epistemology of Jung's theory scientifically, especially in relation to synchronicity. And as he wrote, "I nevertheless, as a physicist, have the impression that the statistical correspondence of quantum physics, seen through the point of view of synchronicity, is a very weak generalization of the old causality. Although microphysics allows for an acausal form of observation, it actually has no use for the concept of meaning." In 1933, Pauli published his second book on physics, Handbuch der Physik, which was considered the definitive book in the new field of quantum physics. Rather incredibly, when collaborating on synchronicity, Jung and Pauli discussed the hermetic principle of correspondence, which Pauli had adapted. Pauli's contrast of energy and momentum with space-time matched the dichotomy posed by the relativistic view of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. The more that is known about space-time, the less that is known about energy-momentum. Similarly, a four-dimensional entity in relativity, and the converse. Indeed, Pauli was to write, after a careful critique of so many experiences and arguments, "I have come to accept the existence of deeper spiritual layers that cannot be adequately defined by the conventional concept of time." That so many of us believe in synchronicity to be more than simply chance does make it a phenomenon worthy of scientific evaluation, but one which can only be partially understood using the scientific method of experimentation. But of course, if we take out the space-time dimension, then synchronicity no longer seems so mystical. Perhaps the most important observation from this collaboration was that the mind and matter are one. With Jung writing, we do not know whether we are on the empirical plane regarded as physical and may not. In the unknown beyond our experience, be identical with what is in the side of the border we distinguish from the physical as psychic. Though we know from experience that the psychic processes are related to material ones, we are not in a position to say what this relation consists of, or how it is possible at all, precisely because the psychic and the physical are mutually dependent. It has often been conjectured that they may be identical somewhere beyond our present existence, though this certainly does not justify the arbitrary hypothesis of either materialism or spiritualism. Pauli made important contributions in the field of quantum mechanics, although he rarely published papers, and many of his theories are contained in correspondence with colleagues such as Niels Bohr from the University of Copenhagen and Werner Heisenberg. In 1921, Pauli worked with Bohr to create the Aufbau principle, which described the building up electrons in shells. Pauli proposed in 1924 a new quantum degree of freedom, or quantum number, with two possible values to resolve the inconsistencies between observed molecular spectra and quantum mechanics. He formulated the Pauli exclusion principle, which stands that no two electrons could exist in the same quantum state, identified by four quantum numbers, including his two-value degree of freedom, which was later termed electron spin. Pauli introduced the 2x2 Pauli matrices as the basis of spin operators, thus solving the non-relativistic theory of spin. Dirac invented similar but larger 4x4 spin matrices, used for his relativistic treatment of fermionic spin. My regular viewers will spot the significance of this, which that they may relate to the magic squares in Shams al-Marif. Indeed, the binary nature of these matrices echoes the importance of where one is placed within magic squares. In 1940, Pauli rederived the spin statistics theorem, a critical result of quantum field theory that states that particles with half-integer spin are fermions, whilst particles with integer spins are bosons. The Pauli effect was named after I wrote anecdotal and I'm going to take that out, his bizarre ability to break experimental equipment by being in its vicinity. Indeed, he's said to have felt tension prior to the breakage and relief after they occurred. These strange occurrences were in line with his investigations into the legitimacy of parapsychology, particularly in collaboration with Jung on synchronicity. Indeed, whilst hardly a controlled experiment that so many scientists observed the effect, provides some of the best evidence of parapsychology. You may have picked up that I'm somewhat sceptical of poltergeists, but do believe in such effects. Could this be what we normally call a poltergeist? Pauli developed an ontological theory, the Pauli-Young conjecture, that there is a psychophysically neutral reality, in that the mental and physical aspects are derived from this reality. Pauli thought that the experiments of quantum physics pointed to a deeper reality than that might explain the mind-matter gap. Pauli and Young held that reality was governed by common principles, archetypes as Young would call them, that appear as psychological phenomena or as physical events. They also held synchronicities might reveal some of the underlying reality's workings. Indeed, he began to see physics and psychology as mirror images of each other, which you will be aware are areas that I've been exploring myself, without having been introduced to Pauli's contribution. The search for symmetry and harmony within the laws of nature was a central theme of Pauli's work in physics. A global symmetry is one that keeps a property invariant for the transformation that is applied simultaneously to all points of space-time. A local symmetry is one that keeps a properties invariant when a possible different symmetrical transformation is applied at each point of space-time. Specifically, a local systemary transformation is parameterized by the space-time coordinates. This implies that a global symmetry is also a local symmetry. From these concepts, Pauli expanded on gauge theory, especially as applied to electromagnetism. He was preoccupied with the roots of nature's order in the human mind, and this led him to a study of the astronomer Kepler. Indeed, he initially investigated the impact of archetypes on Plato's cosmos. Just as I had prior to being aware of Pauli, although Pauli largely regrets the effects of archetypes as such. For Kepler, nature was not simply mathematical and rational, but had a magical, symbolic aspect. If the sun and the planets were integrated, as if the sun and planets were an integrated living whole, Kepler himself was influenced by Hermes Trismegistus's as above, so below. He therefore assumed that the solar system reflected an image of the Trinity and the human mind itself. In his 1952 essay, he develops the idea by discussing alchemy, as it recognises this relationship between the observer and their reality. For Pauli, the true image of the self was not a square, but two triangles in the form of a Star of David, the combination of the full feminine with the masculine. Pauli believed that everything has both a rational and an irrational element. Therefore, there is no objective reality. Indeed, in his Pauli principle, when discussing the theory of the atom, showed that the world is non-causal and therefore non-local, that the observer's locale and subjective condition affect reality. Indeed, Pauli believed that physics included mystical dimensions, that this non-determinism in some way represents a return to the anima mundi, or the world soul, which I would call the universal soul, or the essence of Allah. This is the intrinsic connection between all living beings, which relates to the world in much the same way as the soul is connected to the human body. I watched a very amusing lecture on Pauli, which suggested that he would be sceptical of those who claim to have discovered his neutrino and its various flavours, suggesting, as I have, that scientists are able to find whatever they are looking for. Also, as I have suggested, the more finite the level of granulation, the more detailed granulation we discover, but also the more potential for error. Worse still, scientists do not seem to have understood Karl Popper and will always believe that their experiments lead to a discovery and not a potentiality. Pauli died of pancreatic cancer on December the 15th, 1958. His last hospital room was number 137, a fact that he pointed out to his visitors, knowing that his end was near. Whilst I don't fully comprehend this could be related to what we call the Pauli effect, that he was aware with his own interaction with the universe. The number which intrigued and mystified Pauli, as it is the finite structure constant, a physical constant which quantifies the strength of the electromagnetic interaction between elementary charged particles, which is approximately equal to 1 over 137. This is necessary in explaining the fine-tuned universe and multiverse theory. David Peat was born on the 18th of April 1938 in Liverpool and died on the 6th of June 2017 in Paris, Italy. He was a holistic physicist and author. He's also associated with David Bohm. Peat emphasised how Bohm had worked intensively on finding mathematical expression for his vision of an interconnected, enfolded, implicate order from which an explicate order, the world of classical physics, unfolds. Peat wrote of Pauli, increasingly physics and psychology were to play complementary roles in his thinking, and Pauli struggled to develop what he termed a neutral language, one which would equally apply to physics and psychology, to matter and to the psyche. Just as, for example, Jung's discovery of the collective consciousness had exposed the objective level of the mind, so too Pauli argued that quantum mechanics revealed a subjective element in nature, since the outcome of any quantum process depends upon the way it is perceived by the observer. David Deutsch, born on the 18th of May 1953, is a British physicist at the University of Oxford. His work on quantum algorithms began with an 1985 paper, later expanded in 1992 along with Richard Josser to produce the Deutsch-Josser algorithm, one of the first examples of a quantum algorithm that is exponentially faster than any possible deterministic classical algorithm. In his 1985 paper, he also suggested the use of entangled states and Bell's theorem for a quantum key distribution. In his 1997 book, The Fabric of Reality, Deutsch describes his theory of everything. It's not aimed at the reduction of everything to particle physics, but mutual support amongst multiverse, computational, epistemological and evolutionary principles. His theory is somewhat emergist rather than reductive, but there are 4 strands to it. Firstly, Hugh Everett's many worlds interpretation of quantum physics. Secondly, Karl Popper's epistemology, especially its anti-inductivism and requiring a realist, non-instrumental interpretation of scientific theories, and its emphasis on taking these bold conjectures to resist falsification. Thirdly, Alan Turing's theory of computation in the Deutsch-Turing principle, in which the universal Turing machine is replaced by Deutsch's universal quantum computer. And finally, Richard Dawkins' refinement of Darwinian evolutionary theory and modern evolutionary synthesis, especially the idea of a replicator meme as they integrate with Popperian epistemology. Having mentioned Dawkins, I have to mention Rupert Sheldrake. Sheldrake questions conservation of nature, or the standard scientific dogma. His psychic stirring effect suggests that minds are not confined to the brain. He also suggests that DNA is insufficient to explain inheritance, and that inheritance of form and behaviour is mediated through morphic resonance. Sheldrake noted similarities between morphic resonance and Carl Jung's collective unconsciousness. However, whereas Jung assumed that archetypal forms were transmitted through physical inheritance, Sheldrake attributes collective memories to morphic resonance. Interestingly, Sheldrake does attempt to validate his theories using materialist scientific experimentation techniques. If this subject matter has caught your interest, it's worth seeking out talks by Sheldrake, if for no other reason that he's just such a lovely person, exhibiting those qualities I strive so much for, but often fail to display when under pressure.